Good evening, my dears. Welcome. I'm Lady McCreepsta. Today's tale comes from author PF McGrail from his book 50 Shades of Purple and Other Horror Stories. A direct purchase link to this book is in the episode description. This tale is simply called Fingers. So come now, my dears. Lean in closer and we'll begin. These are the breaks, Varsani. Luffle breathed out with a stream of cigarette smoke. It's your shit show now, he smiled. I looked past the man whose gut was protesting the constraints of his belt with all the aggression of Play-Doh squeezing through a toddler's fingers. Past the tiny building we called a police station, past the pathetic semi-paved road that signaled humankind's laughable attempt at demarking the landscape as its own. Big Sky pretty much sums it up. The firmament was icy blue and icy cold, and the 20-mile radius of wide-open land made it abundantly clear that soil we owned did not give two reciprocated shits about our presence. Yup, I responded after much careful consideration. We stood in place for a few quiet moments. The silence in a place that big becomes its own kind of presence if you listen long enough. Whoa, Luffle responded, following his own deep ponderance. God willing, you'll never hear from me again. He wheezed, then dropped his cigarette to the dirt before snuffing it out with the heel of his boot. Humph, Cyanide, Montana, officially the smallest place in the US of A. To have its own police force. He shook his head. And it's all yours, Varsani. He folded his arms and turned to stare at me, but I was unable to read his eyes through his opaque lenses. Or should I call you Captain? He snorted. Judge, jury, executioner. He laughed, and it was a painful, rasping, wheezing sound. Doesn't matter two shits to me, Varsani, he huffed as he walked towards his all-black SUV. Cyanide's not the state's problem anymore. I followed him and waited by the door as he heaved himself into the car with no small effort. So, I continued, hoping to get everything I could before he disappeared. I'm the only cop in the entire fucking community? What's gonna be the state's protocol when I need help? They outlined it after incorporation. Luffle waved his hand like he was swatting flies. No one over at Great Falls gives a shit about your backwater cousin orgy of a town. What's the rule when you need help? He shot my question back at me as he rumbled the engine to life. Don't. The breaks occupy a rugged swath of Montana wilderness that could hold 10 million people, but simply didn't feel like it. Snow, cold, bears, and isolation shroud the land in a protective layer that sends a kindly fuck you to humanity as a whole. There were many unwritten rules. Today I learned that you're on your own applied to law enforcement. Cyanide was too wild to be important to the white folks in Great Falls, too forsaken to make a difference to everyone left at the Fort Belknap reservation, and too flyover to get noticed by anyone else. One of the unwritten rules is that you cannot expect what's not explicitly promised. Giving Cyanide its own police force promised to alleviate a lot of trouble for a lot of people. I was alone. Drunk driving is a major fucking problem in Montana, so I thought I'd try to make a difference. I sat outside, out of town, and waited for suspicious drivers. 2 straight hours passed with no drivers at all. I noticed this as I cracked another beer. But the view through the open windows was fucking killer. I truly believe that every wavelength of light from brick red to daffodil yellow claimed its own patch of sky as the sun timidly peeked behind the broken horizon on its long trek to celestial slumber. Every green leaf soaked up the dwindling wisps of sacred warmth as the earth prepared itself for sleep. I had a pretty good buzz going by the time the sky was pitch black and would have gone home much earlier if there'd been someone waiting for me. My thoughts were interrupted by the thump. Something heavy and living was definitely on the roof of my car. I reached for the shotgun, afraid that turning the engine would piss off something that shouldn't be pissed off. That's when I saw the fingers. One at a time, they poked around the tops of the windows. One set on the driver's side, one on the passenger's side. The smallest fingers, long and thin, wrapped around first. They were followed by a pair of ring fingers, then middle fingers. The passenger's side got the right hand, and the doorway 6 inches from my head was occupied by the left. 4 fingers reached around, then 5, 6, 7. I stopped counting when I realized that this wasn't a human hand. I clutched the shotgun and quietly reclined my seat. And from that vantage point, I could see the fingers coming in through the rear windows. Another left hand, another right hand, even though the sounds from above indicated only one creature was there. When those hands reached 7 fingers, I closed my eyes and weighed my options. I could come out shooting or drive away with the thing on the roof of my car. Neither seemed like a good option. I wondered who would be the first to notice that I was dead. That's when the first teardrop fell, and then a pine tree shattered. I don't mean to say it toppled. I mean that it was eviscerated with a force that could only be intentional. I had seen the Rice Ridge fire as it consumed a man's home in less than a minute, squashing his entire history like a cigarette under a policeman's boot. He was standing 200 feet away, sobbing inconsolably as he watched his everything burn to the ground with his wife trapped inside, screaming. That was the day I chose to believe in God, because nothing else would be able to make a man feel so insignificant. The tree had exploded with the force of God. I didn't hear it fall, and I was sure that it was because the entire fucking thing had been reduced to splinters. Another tree exploded, this time on the left side of the road. I kept a white-knuckled grip on the shotgun as I considered turning the key. I looked at the barrel of the gun. It was only a few inches from my forehead. Only a few. Another tree exploded behind me, and I realized there was no safe retreat. That's when the scream tore through my car. It was the thing above me. It was screaming at the trees. It was fucking pissed. Thump, 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 thump. It ran across my roof and pattered over my hood. Then it jumped from the front of my car, screamed again, and it was gone. The trees stopped exploding, but a groaning shook the earth so hard that my asshole felt loose. That was about the time I decided to get the fuck out of Dodge. I turned the car on and screamed at what I saw in the lights. Closing my eyes, I threw the engine into reverse and slammed the gas. I pretended not to hear the groaning in the background. I imagined that I didn't hear the screams. I certainly wasn't about to acknowledge that I did hear the splintering of trees. And no one could get me to admit that I had seen a human face in my headlights before I pulled away. Anyway, that was my first night in the breaks. Relatively tame in retrospect, and I suppose that's the only reason I stuck around. I don't know if the fingers were trying to protect me or if they got distracted by a bigger predator. I do know that I played dumb when I got called up to investigate 19 trees 13 miles out of cyanide that had been reduced to fine grain sawdust. What was I supposed to say? That I genuinely don't know who won the fight? That it would explain the deep scorched marks on the hood of the roof of my car? That I understood why those marks were shaped like human hands and feet, but I had no explanation for the claw and hoof burns? And what was I supposed to do? Call the cops? What's the strangest thing that has ever happened to you on your first day at a new job? If you are watching on YouTube, let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, pop me a message on Twitter or Facebook. I am Lady McCreepster on both. If you have just discovered me, my dears, welcome. Feel free to have a wander in my realm and be sure to subscribe before you leave. If you are watching on YouTube, hit that bell icon too to be notified of new uploads. That's all I have for you this evening, my dears. Till next time, sweet dreams.